I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, consciousness, and what it all means. I just wanted to start today. Last month, I thanked my newest Patreons, and now I'd like to thank some of my OGs, as my kids would say, Patreons who have been supporting the show for quite some time. I'm so grateful you all hear this every time I get on for all of my support. It makes such a difference to me. I know I sound like a broken record, but it really helps. Other than your support, the podcast is just supported by me. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. There's production, there's the social media piece, there's just managing all the guests and making sure they're booked and we have all of their information and everything. So it is no easy feat. And it is a very small village that runs this process. So a huge shout out today and thank you to Haley, Patricia, Ashley, Catherine, Bonnie, Diana, Jessica, Jill, Willow, Corinne, Laura, Vicky, Camille, Luis, Cheryl, Caroline, Ryan, Margaret, Sarah, Nina, Alicia, Jennifer, and Mark. And there are more that will come next month, but this is just a big thank you for those who have supported. Also, if you are not following me on Instagram yet, please do so at Dr. Amy Robbins. If you are not subscribed to my newsletter, please do so at dramyrobbins.com, where I share soul wisdoms every other week, which are my channeled insights, and also share when I share the podcast episodes, I share other episodes that I'm guesting on, as well as previous episodes that pertain to something similar to the podcast. I do not clog your inbox. I know how annoying it can be to get emails constantly day after day. This is not that. So please go ahead and subscribe to my email list at dramyrobbins.com. Also, I have my ghost stories today. So if you are new to the podcast, ghost stories are my way of sharing with you all, or your way of sharing with me, I should say, your stories of amazing signs and synchronicities and how loved ones show up in your life to help everybody expand their consciousness and notice the magic of this incredible world and universe we live in. So if you have a ghost story to share, you can also share that on my website. There's a share my ghost story, and you just share that. Ghost stories are typically at least 5 minutes, which is about 2 pages worth of single-spaced content. So please take the time to do that. I love your ghost stories. You all love the ghost story episodes. Those are always a fan favorite here on the podcast. So please take a minute to do that. Also, if you could rate and review the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, all of this helps me continue to grow this work I'm doing and to spread this way of thinking and this elevated consciousness and awareness into the world. And boy, do we need more of that now. So please go ahead and rate and review and subscribe to the podcast. And with that, here is today's ghost story. I have always had a curiosity about what happens to us beyond the veil of this physical life on Earth. And I always believed in signs, despite never receiving one, to my understanding. My grandparents died either before I was born or before the age of 10. I didn't understand the grief of these losses, as I was fairly young. I was just told they went to heaven, and that was it. On the day my dad left this world, I felt what it was like to experience earth-shattering grief, but also what it was like to finally start seeing signs. My dad was my best friend for the 29 years of my life that he was alive. He raised, supported, and encouraged me to do the very best I could with this time in this world. Over the years, his health started to decline from diabetes. This led to extensive cardiac problems, starting with his first heart attack in 2012. Over the years, his health continued to decline from the cardiac disease, combined with not taking the best care of himself. He became less capable of being able to travel. I love to travel and love to include him in some ways on vacations, that I would book with my partner. After returning from a road trip in August 2017 to see the Great American Solar Eclipse, I was at his house showing him all the photos I took of the path of totality. He said our next trip should be to see the Northern Lights. Fast forward to February 2009, the evening of Valentine's Day to be specific. My dad was rushed to the hospital with chest pains. Over the years since his first major heart attack, my dad was hospitalized numerous times with episodes of chest pains or cardiac episodes. These were usually remedied with catheterizations, stents, adjustments of medications, etc. So while going in the hospital was serious, we all accepted this as normal, and it became known as Henry Tune-Up. My dad had a great sense of humor like that. He knew his heart would eventually succumb to its disease. So instead of being sad, he would crack jokes. Another one of which being that he often joked he would haunt all of us after he was gone. And I believe he surely kept that promise. The next day, my dad spent the whole day waiting for his catheterization procedure. The hospital didn't get him into the operating room until later that evening, so it was fairly late by the time the procedure ended. By that point, it had been 48 hours since he entered the hospital, and we learned he didn't do well during the procedure and throughout the rest of the night. We also learned there were complications in breaking up his newest blockage, so instead the doctors were trying to break it up through an IV medicine. In addition to the blockage, he aspirated during the catheterization. The doctors assured us it wasn't very serious and that his lungs were just wet. When I was finally able to see him, my dad was in and out of sleep. I touched his eyes and I remember thinking his skin felt different. He opened his eyes and told me he loved me and then closed them again. The rest of this visit felt different than hospital visits. There was a veil of ominous energy and time felt still but also fleeting. There was no reassurance of his condition improving and that there was an elephant in the room of what was to come. The nurse came in and said his blood pressure was dipping here and there and that he was having periods of sleep apnea. Several times during my visit with him, the nurse would shake him awake to let him know he wasn't breathing. My dad didn't look concerned, nor did he say a word in his response. Instead, he would just drift back to sleep. While my dad laid in the hospital bed looking the most peaceful I have ever seen him, I continued to ask the nurse about different types of sleep apnea masks we could buy that would be more comfortable for him when he went home. I don't know why I chose to discuss this with her. Maybe I wanted to believe he would end up at home after all of this. In retrospect, it was quite clear that he was actively dying before our eyes. It was time to leave as visiting hours were over. My dad was still sleeping, but I said goodbye and that I loved him. It was so hard to walk out of the room. As I crossed the threshold into the hallway, I could make out the last words I would ever hear him say, as he said them to his nurse. These words were, "My chest hurts." It was almost impossible to sleep that night. I kept jolting awake. When I finally fell asleep, I wasn't in an ordinary dream. I felt detached from my physical body. What I was seeing in this dream was that I was outside in a vast open area. It felt like a field, even though I couldn't see much around me besides the night sky and a faint horizon. The sky had no stars. As I walked, I could see a single mountain appear directly in front of me, and what suddenly started sailing above that mountain were the Northern Lights. They were the most beautiful, incredible auras bursting with shades of brilliant green whipping around the night sky. Despite me being asleep, I could feel it take my breath away. Next, I felt my body rushing in a way that was a smooth forward motion, as if I was running toward the mountain with urgency, with my eyes locked on the shadow of lights, hoping they didn't disappear. To this day, I can still close my eyes and picture that scene, which is something I cannot do for any other ordinary dream after so much time has elapsed. I was jolted awake, and my first feeling was that I ripped away something, my first feeling as though I was ripped away from something. And the first image that came to mind was my dad. It was like I had this visceral knowledge of these Northern Lights I was just looking at in the dream, was a personification of him telling me goodbye as he departed this earthly plane. I always knew that the most important thing Dad wanted in death was for us, his children and family, not to witness him die in a way that left us feeling scared or sad. I feel in my soul that this was his body sending me a message along that his spirit had transcended his body, no matter how sick that body was. All of this information seemingly downloaded into my brain. As I woke up more to process it all, my phone rang. It was the dreaded call from my uncle. I knew from his voice as soon as I picked up what he was going to say. It was exactly that. My dad had passed away during the night. In the years since my dad crossed over, he continued to show signs that he is around in various ways, big or small. He mostly shows himself with hawks, the songs played at his wake, and number patterns. One time that sticks out most recently when I really needed a sign was on my way to work. A truck cut me off with the license plate 021719, the day he died. Though it was the saddest day of my life, seeing that made me smile, as my dad was a straightforward man and quite honestly never entirely believed in the afterlife, an irony to how present he continues to be to me in it. I knew he would show himself in the most evident ways, a way I couldn't miss. I may not be able to pick up the phone and call him, but I surely know I can still talk to him. I believe in signs more than ever before. There are too many things that cannot be explained to go beyond the orbit of mere coincidence. Because of these signs that he continues to show me, my brother, my sister, and even my partner at times, I know that in death, my dad continues to be my northern light. What a beautiful story. And I love the image painted of these amazing northern lights. So thank you so much for sharing. I know you all love these ghost stories. I love the ghost stories. Please continue to participate in them. If you have a ghost story to share, share it. And I will likely read it on the show. So thank you so much for sharing the ghost story. And thanks for listening to Life, Death, and the Space Between. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.